Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Glab, Executive Director of the Flint Institute of Arts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Kommareddi Family Lecture. Tonight, we have Rebecca Brown presenting Written Pictures, Art, Abstraction, and Freedom in 1960s Chennai. The Kommareddi Family Lecture Series focuses on topics related to the art, history, and culture of South Asia, and is sponsored by Jay Rashi and Dr. Prasad Kommareddi. Please let's give them a round of applause for their generous support. Our next Kommareddi Family Lecture will be held on Wednesday, May 20th at 6 p.m., so mark your calendars for May 20th. And I'd also like to mention that our next Thompson Lecture is with Egyptologist Dr. Chris Naughton, who will be presenting Tutankhamun in Life, Death, and Eternal Afterlife here at the FIA on October 7th. The Thompson Lecture is members only, so if you are not a member of the FIA, please sign up online or at the front desk before October 7th. You really won't want to miss this lecture. And if you're a member, you also get signed up for all of the great programs, including the Kommareddi Family Lecture. You get to hear all about those programs in advance. So it's a great deal to be a member. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to thank the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation for their continued support, which is so deeply appreciated and vital to the FIA. And I would like to thank the citizens of Genesee County for demonstrating their support by means of the Genesee County Arts, Education, and Cultural Enrichment Millage, which provides free entry to the FIA for Genesee County citizens 7 days a week. And a big thank you to Huntington Bank for Huntington Free Saturdays, which allows everyone else beyond our county to enter for free on Saturdays. Thank you, Huntington Bank. Now, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Rebecca Brown is professor of the history of art and chair of museum studies and cultural heritage management programs at Johns Hopkins University. Her books include Art for a Modern India, 1947 to 1980, which is a critical engagement with modernism in the decades after decolonization. Gandhi's Spinning Wheel and the Making of India, which traces the genealogy and spinning and the anti-colonial movement of the early 20th century. Displaying Time, the Many Temporalities of the Festival of India, a study of the diplomatic, museological, and cultural machinations of the long 1980s. And she has co-edited 7 volumes and special issues on photography, craft, place, and the art of Asia. She has curated exhibitions and consulted for museums and galleries in North America and India. Everyone, please join me in a warm Flint welcome for Rebecca Brown.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Tracy. This is such a warm welcome. It's been a wonderful day or so that I've been in town, and I'm really excited to share my work with you and with the community here. So first, my thanks to the Flint Institute of Art, to Tracy and to Sarah Cohn, one of the curators here who's been coordinating with me for my visit, and especially to Jay Kommareddi, who has been just an enthusiastic cheerleader for art history, for South Asia, to get all of us in this room together, and I can't thank her enough, so thank you. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on today is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homeland of many indigenous nations. Most recently, the Anishinaabe tribal nations, and my own home city of Baltimore, and where I teach at Johns Hopkins, is the ancestral indigenous home of the Piscataway tribe, who continue to be stewards of the lands of the Chesapeake Bay region. And I want to acknowledge both of those things here today before getting started. So today, I'm very excited to share with you an artist. And there we go. An artist I've been working on for many years, KCS Panikkar. He is, like many artists from the Global South, both well-known and also utterly unknown. So if you've never heard of him before, do not feel bad, this is fine, this is why I'm here. How can we, as we first approach his painting, figure out a path in? One way is to just look for a minute. His painting invites us to look closely, to try to figure it out, to marvel at small details like the monkeys, which are some of my favorite monkeys in art, actually, these guys here. The monkeys, the parakeets, the leaves that kind of also look like teardrops maybe, or something else. And then there are these scribbles and text on the surface and symbols. These, in this particular painting, float almost like speech bubbles, like he's transcribing the monkey chatter that he hears in the trees. Sometimes he uses English, as in this painting from 1964 called Premonitions. And this gives us a sense in the Anglophone world of what some of his other paintings, he only uses English for 2-3 paintings at the beginning of the series in 1963-64. But you might be able to pick out a few words in this. I have to take my glasses off to see this. So let's see. Psychological, maybe a couple of, that might say death, right? So you can sort of almost read it. Down here, he has a wonderful passage where there's a bird figure and then there's the word fly, which I just love. So he's mixing words in. You can see math equations. They don't quite add up to something that you could sort of read as a poem or as a quote from someone. Other times, his work dissolves almost into sort of all over scribbles. It looks like a different language entirely. It's not English anymore. And for some of you in the audience, whom I met earlier actually, familiar with Indian languages, it looks a little bit like Malayalam. And I've written out the name of the language up there in the corner for those of you not familiar, which is a language spoken in southwestern India. And it is Panikkar's familial language. I'll come back to that, but my main opening point is that we all bring our own histories of looking, our own cultural familiarities, our own biases and presuppositions to looking at the work. But the first step is always looking. Opening ourselves up a bit to something that an artist some 60 years ago thought was important enough to work out in a painting that he then sent out into the world for us to consider. So today, I want to invite you to look further at KCS Panikkar's work, to give you a sense of what he was doing, along with his colleagues in southern India in the 60s and 70s. So I'll tell you up front a few key things that guide me. There we go. And this is a picture of him working on one of the paintings that you'll see later. So, a few key things. He cared very much about situating his work in a larger web of art and history. He called Paul Klee his guru, or teacher. In Malayalam, the language of his sort of familial home, and in many Indian languages, there's no verb to paint, or even a separate word for painting. Instead, one writes a picture. And Panikkar himself used the phrase free calligraphy to describe his work and the way that he thought about text in his paintings. So those are some 4 sort of provocations that have guided me as I've thought about Panikkar over the last, 7-8 years. So what does it mean that a Swiss-German artist, Paul Klee, who's a generation or 2 before Panikkar, is his guru, is his teacher? What does the fact that we must think about paintings as written pictures do to our understanding of his work and the understanding of the work of those around him? And what does free mean, the free calligraphy, in the context of the 1960s, when politics around the world are focused on this idea of freedom, right? New countries are free of the yoke of colonialism. Civil rights battles are taking place around the world to assert the rights of people of color and minority groups. And wars are being fought to assert particular ideologies that are discussed via a language of freedom. Some of these also ring true today to a certain extent. These questions have guided my thinking for the last few years, so I'm excited to invite you into this corner of 20th century art history to unfold some of that for you today, using Panikkar as our guide. So first, we need some context. Before we get into all of this, I've thrown a lot of terms at you, I've thrown new languages at you probably, so lots of new paintings. Let's talk about a map, okay? So first of all, this is India, and Panikkar is based for most of his career in the city that is now called Chennai in southern India, which is in Tamil Nadu. And you may already know this, but in India, so Chennai in Tamil Nadu, it used to be called Madras, so you may be more familiar with that name. And in Tamil Nadu, they speak Tamil. He is from Kerala, which is down in southwest India here, where they speak the Malayalam language and where people from Kerala are called Malayalis. And you may not know this, but in India, there are 22 official languages in the Indian constitution, and that is just a fraction of the actual number of languages spoken in India that are distinct languages spoken by more than 10,000 people. There's some hundreds of those languages. And the languages roughly fall into two major groups. One is Indo-European, so you might have heard of languages like Hindi, Bengali, those are Indo-European. They're totally related to English, German, French, they're connected. The other group of languages is this blue area in the south, and they're called Dravidian languages, and they're related to one another, but they're not super related to Indo-European, although there's some borrowing across those lines. So Malayalam and Tamil are both Dravidian languages spoken in South India, right? You with me? Yes. Okay, excellent. The other thing that we have to talk about, and one of the things I say to my classes when I'm introducing India to them is, look, this subcontinent that you're looking at here is the same size, roughly, as Europe. So we think of it as one thing, it's India, right? But actually it's completely as diverse as Europe in terms of the kind of food that people eat, the kind of languages they speak. So this map gives you a sense of all the different languages. There's Malayalam down there, and next to Tamil. Hindi is one that you might have known from the north. And then I pulled this slide, which is very helpful, that gives you a sense of what the language, what the writing looks like in the south for the southern Indian languages. And we'll come back to this in a little bit, but just the writing that you see is the name of the language written out in the script, right? So Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, Telugu. Okay. But they also all eat different things, right? Have different marriage ceremonies, prohibit different things from being eaten, and of course religion is varied across the entire subcontinent. Religions that you would expect, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Islam, but also Christianity is incredibly strong in the South, and there's a long history of Judaism as well in the South. And these are sort of no longer imported religions. These are South Indian, these are Indian Christian religions, right? So they have a different kind of flavor and approach to the religion that one might know here in the States by the same name. Okay, so lots of diversity in India. And what else did I want to tell you? Yes, okay. So all of that diversity is in play well before the subcontinent is colonized. And this starts happening first with the Portuguese in the 16th century, and then the British, Dutch, and French in the 17th century. And so Chennai is actually one of the earliest, or what is then called Madras, so down here, is one of the earliest colonial cities in India, along with Calcutta and Bombay. And it is also the capital of one of the major colonial presidencies, the Madras Presidency, which is in this red area, and extends sort of all the way across the southern cone there. In Madras, the British found one of the first art schools in South Asia, which is the Madras Art School. They also found an art school in Calcutta and also in Lahore, what is present-day Pakistan, and in Bombay a little bit later. The Madras Art School is still there, still training art students, still going strong. And so this is a photograph of their campus with a brick that says the School of Arts in Madras. Okay, so the artist at the center of my talk today, KCS Panikkar, was born in 1911. There he is, as a young man in London. In 1954. He was born in 1911 in what was then the Madras Presidency, over on the far western edge of that southern cone, near what is today Kerala, to a Malayali family. He worked as a telegraph operator and as an insurance salesman, very good professions, before the then principal of the Madras Art School kind of called him in and said, hey, why don't you join the school as a student? He earned his diploma in painting in 1940, he became a teacher, and then 17 years later succeeded that principal, D.P. Roy Chowdhury, who was a Bengali, in 1957. Unfortunately, he died a little bit early of cancer in 1977. So his life overlaps with massive changes in India and in southern India. So let me just sketch out a few of these. While he was working as a student in Madras, the anti-colonial movement was in full swing, including both nonviolent action and uprisings against the British colonial government that were very much violent. In the midst of this Quit India movement, and as war raged across the world in the 1940s, Panikkar drew together a group of artists based in Madras to form the Progressive Painters Association in 1944. So he's, 33 at that time. So even as a young professional teacher, he's trying to get people to join and in solidarity with one another to create groups of conversation and like-minded artists sharing their ideas and things like this. In 1947, India won its independence from Britain and established itself as a democracy. But it also split in two, in what was called the partition. Millions of people migrated, most on foot, between the newly formed India and Pakistan, and violence broke out between Hindu and Muslim groups, such that 500,000 people died, and that's an estimate, probably a low one, with many more displaced, and with violence against women and children at the center of these horrible events and the transformation of the subcontinent. Meanwhile, similar forced migrations and divisions of countries happened in Europe, the Middle East, and East Asia, dividing families and ripping apart communities, establishing a new global framework of geopolitical reality and antagonism also around the world. And it's at this moment that a new term, the term that we're very familiar with now, but actually wasn't really in play before World War II, the term is refugee, emerged in this period, with the new global organizations attempting to help the newly displaced. So Panikkar, who is 39 in 1950, painted a series of paintings in 50-51 that address this massive tragedy, turning to religious and political figures for solace. And these are called his Pavement Dwellers series, and this one is particularly difficult to read, actually, just in terms of the paint on the canvas, but also once you see that what we're looking at are people who are starving and children kind of reaching up to elders trying to get food, and people shivering in their nakedness. And so it's a very dark scene of mass displacement and mass starvation and hunger. This one might be a little easier to read. This is a slightly smaller watercolor in the same series called Pavement Dwellers, World War II, where you have a woman sort of kneeling on the ground, looking up. You have two children over on the left, and then you have figures like this one here who kind of resonates as Jesus. And this figure here who some have interpreted as the Buddha, and this figure here with his back to us, and wearing a simple loincloth, who people have interpreted as Gandhi. And indeed, in another painting, he includes all three of those figures very much more explicitly. So there's both desperation and hope in the way that he's trying to grapple with the realities of this changing world around him. He travels to the UK and to Europe in 1954. And when he's in Europe, unlike any of his other contemporaries that I know of, many of whom went to Europe, he goes to Paris, he goes to London, he goes to Italy, and he goes to Switzerland to see Paul Klee's work in Bern. So there's a picture on the left of his show in Paris. And then on the right, this is a picture of him in 1959 when he went on a trip to the USSR, again with other artists, both trips sponsored by various cultural organizations. And in 59, he's already principal of the art school, and he travels around and meets artists, visits other art schools, ends up coming back via Samarkand and some of the Central Asian republics. In 1963, he comes here to the US. And again, he goes to the places you would expect, New York, DC, he goes to Chicago, and then he goes to Denver and Santa Fe and Midland, Texas. And so it's like a really interesting sort of journey. And I think it's because he knows people in these places. He's been corresponding with them. And so here, this is a postcard to his son, his young son, who becomes a sculptor later, from the train between Denver and San Francisco, where he's talking about the mountains and everything he's seeing. So that's 1963. Earlier that year, or the same year at some point, he founds a different organization. So the Progressive Artists is still going on. He founds the Artists Handicrafts Association of Madras, which is an organization that encourages artists to develop craft skills and produce batik, metalwork, jewelry, ceramics, this kind of thing, that can be easily saleable to both a local and an international audience. And when I first read about this, I thought, this is not going to work. But actually, they had an in with an international distributor, and they actually made a decent amount of money from this project. And so you see here a batik show that they staged in Madras with Conacher in the center examining some of these batiks. In 1963, so he's founded the Artists Handicrafts. He goes to the US, and I think after he goes to the US, I'm not sure, he paints this painting. And this is the first of his Words and Symbols series, which is the last series of his career. And we've seen some of these before. This is one of his English language ones with a little bit of math thrown in, and it's called A Fruit Cellar. During this time, in the early to mid-60s, his work is shown around the world. He is in the 1961 Sao Paulo Biennial. He is shown in Japan. He is shown in London at the Commonwealth Arts Festival. He's shown at the 33rd Venice Biennial in 1966. So he's making it, right? He's getting into the international eye. The year he showed at Venice in 1966, with a group of artists from the college, this is beginning to be a pattern, right? Many of these artists from the college were also Malayali, like him, from Kerala, some from other southern Indian communities. He founds the Cholamandalam Artists Village, which is usually just called Cholamandal, just south of Madras, between the North-South Highway and the beach. There, artists use the money raised by the Artists Handicrafts Association to purchase small plots of land and build houses and studios and outdoor theater and other gathering places. They invite theater troupes, they host traveling artists from around the world. This is the brochure they produced, which is not that readable. So they host traveling artists, they set up sculpture workshops, they continue to make crafts and sell them, they make art, they party a lot, it's the 60s, they start families, and they grow a community. Some of them leave for Europe or for other parts of India, but they all retain a connection to this place, which still exists as an artist village with a museum. So next time you're in Chennai, head down the road and take a left at Cholamandal. In the 1960s in the southern region, and particularly in Tamil Nadu, where Madras was the state's capital, violent anti-Hindi agitations are happening at this time, so in the mid-1960s. In independent India, the central government in Delhi wants to make Hindi the national language, the language of bureaucracy, the language taught in schools. And many across the South are very opposed to this, absolutely resisting it, building a counter movement that is both anti-Hindi, but interestingly, for those whose who are Malayali living in Tamil Nadu, it's also very pro-Tamil. So there's a kind of exclusion also of other South Indian languages in this movement. Panikkar and his colleagues sit at the center of the storm, and I show you a picture here of them sitting in the amphitheater that they built, building a community for Southern Indian artists of multiple linguistic and cultural heritages on the beach. That is the setup. A painter coming into his career as the country becomes free and is split, as the region is riled with language politics, and as he himself takes the leadership of the art school in Madras, travels the world, and brings that experience back to build what is now one of the longest standing artist communities in the world. Okay, so just as a reminder of my earlier slide where I listed out the questions that are driving me here, and let me just check the time to see where we are. Okay, we're good. So let me just run through some of the thoughts that I'm having and show you some more of his paintings along the way. He was very concerned with the question of let me back up. I'm very concerned with the question of how we understand artists' works. And one of the things that we tend to do is say, oh, it looks like fill in the blank, this person that I already know, right? And that's totally fine, and we all start from that perspective. But what it ends up doing is reinforcing the centrality of this canon of art that we get taught in school, or that we've learned in museums, or that we end up seeing in museums. And what I hope for today is that maybe we can expand that slice of art history a little bit for you, so that you can think about other kinds of artists when you look at any art, really. But also, I want to honor the fact that these artists sitting in Chennai or in just south of Chennai in 1960s are looking at books on Paul Klee. They're looking at modern art books that talk about Western artists. They're not isolated in any way, shape, or form. So they're learning the same canon of artists that you and I are also learned. So we want to figure out a way to kind of thread that needle. We don't want to make them sound like they're just copying or derivative or second-hand versions of someone. We want to honor the fact that Panikkar said, Paul Klee is his guru. Like, that's big. What does that even mean? So this is part of what I'm trying to do today. And sometimes you can sort of put paintings together and they have different resonances. I'm sure you've made some connections as I've been talking, right? But I want to see if we can maybe draw out some of these more directly. So Panikkar was very active in trying to educate his fellow artists, both about global art and about art in India, and then to send that message about art in India out into the world. And he did that through two publications, a journal named Art Trends, which you see on the right, which started publishing in 1961, and a book that he and the Cholamandal artists put together in 1974. And these are kind of amazing publications because he wrote some of the essays in here himself. Other artists also wrote little blurbs. He he would send letters to friends that he met on his travels, critics, art historians, other artists, and say, can you write an essay on something for me and I'll put it in the journal. And then he would gather pithy quotes, which you see here. This is in the book, a list of quotes here, and then in the journal, you can see that there are sort of articles and then also little quotes, and then he publishes images, both of older work, but also of emerging artists in India. And he would send the journal to friends around the world to try to get the word out about what was happening in India. So I kind of think it's almost like the social media of his time. He's like Instagramming but like via the mail, right? Okay. So trying to make the work of India legible. All right, so that's one. He really wanted to be situated in this global context. And here is the quote where he says that Paul Klee is his guru. So number two is, what does it mean that Paul Klee is his guru? I used to hear a lot about Paul Klee even then, in the early 60s. Egyptian pictures and hieroglyphs influenced him considerably. It was Paul Klee who roused plenty of hopes in me. Paul Klee is closer to our art than Picasso or Braque. His lines are simple and full of life. After learning the lessons imparted by Klee, I was at a loss how to commence work on the basis of these from scratch. I did not like to copy him. It would be an insult to my guru. I had to begin from the beginning like a beginner, like any beginner. And I think that repetition of beginner is really is really telling. So he's telling us, Paul Klee is so important to me, but maybe you won't see that much Paul Klee in my work because I'm not going to copy him, right? So then what is actually going to be in there? And so one of my provocations as I was thinking is, what if we considered Paul Klee an Indian artist? What if we imagine him not as a distant influence, but a fellow traveler, living, developing in India alongside those who read his pedagogical sketchbook, saw his works, thought about his framing of modernism and the problems of line, shape, and color. And I started to think about it as a Klee spirit haunting India. Because Klee often comes up, and here's some works by Paul Klee. Klee often comes up in conversations with artists from India, so this provocation is not that far-fetched. And to be clear, I don't mean it as a kind of influence, a simple influence making these artists derivative. I want to take seriously, right, as I've said, the deep imbrications of Klee in all of his complexity. So I think, let's see, so part of the reason that I think Klee is so important to these Indian artists and not some other artists like Jackson Pollock or even Van Gogh or others who they also knew about and were writing about and were quoting in these publications, Klee keeps coming up again and again. And it's partly because his work is actually accessible. His writing is accessible. He publishes a pedagogical sketchbook, which is kind of transcriptions of his lecture notes when he's teaching, and very quickly it's translated into English, and very quickly it travels around the world. And it's a little book, and it's a how-to for artists. So it actually speaks to artists directly. It's not some academic book. And you can see that he's got diagrams in it, and then this is actually from his original notes for his lectures that they took, that he used to make the pedagogical sketchbook book. In 1922, there was an exhibition in Calcutta of the Bauhaus, including Klee works. Now, of course, Panikkar didn't see this. He was, 11 at the time. But his teachers did, right? So there's a whole group of artists in Calcutta seeing the Bauhaus show who then go on to become teachers at those other art schools. And that's, in some ways, how I think a lot of the Paul Klee spirit gets transmitted. And this is, unfortunately, we don't have pictures of the 1922 exhibition, but it was recreated in 2013 in Germany, so that's what you're seeing here. So the accessibility is a big part of it. And also, Klee can be almost anything you want him to be. He has a really diverse body of work. So 3 things that he does. One, and this is, I'm going to show you some Indian artists, again, looking at the time. I'm going to show you some Indian artists with Paul Klee, right, to give you a sense of what I'm seeing. One is landscape, garden, animals. So here we have Prabhakar Barve here on the left and Akbar Padanse on the right, both Indian artists working in the 60s, both talk about Klee. And I paired them with this Paul Klee work because they're thinking about a kind of controlled approach to landscape. And they're thinking about color, right? And we'll get to color in a second as well. I think that's really important for Klee. I draw connections between Klee, who was somewhat obsessed with animals and birds and used crows a lot in his work, with Panikkar, who also ends up using crows a lot in his work. And this is something that I think is very universal. The crow-raven figure is something that we see in all kinds of cultures around the world, and so this is something they can use to tap into something that we all have an angle on. And so you can see here the Paul Klee's crows, and then the crows in the tree in Panikkar's painting, which is called Crows. For the interest of time, I'm going to skip this one and go to the Klee spirit number 2, which is color. So this is kind of amazing to me. This painting here on the left is KCS Panikkar, and I think it's unusual for him. I think what it is it's his experiment with Paul Klee's writings on color. Because he's putting all of the colors next to one another, and then he's drawing these lines on top that are sort of diagrammatic, which he does a lot. And it really resonated with me with some of the clay experiments with color. And you see an example here in the center where he's pushing and pulling the colors between one another. He's making them move. If you blur your eyes out, it kind of starts to kind of move like this, and the same is true of Clay's paintings. And then Clay's cousin, one generation younger, P. Gopinath, who is an artist in Cholamandal, south of Chennai, still alive today, still working. He also, I think, is drawing on this question of color and how do we match colors together. And as a bonus, he also has a bird in his painting. Another Cholamandal artist, Velu Vishwanathan, who had a big show at the Sharjah Biennial earlier this year, he too is really delving into color. And those of you who are Malayalis in the audience will recognize that this deep, deep red is something that comes out of a variety of different cultural practices in Kerala, specifically, that both Velu Vishwanathan and Gopinath talk about in their work. So color is both an experiment and also a cultural reference for them. And finally, this question of line and drawing, and we're going to talk about written pictures in a second, but I wanted to get this connection fully fleshed out. We have Panikkar on the left, a different painting, one of my favorites actually, and then Madhvi Parekh, who's an artist based in Delhi, who is self-taught, and the way she taught herself was she had the Clay's pedagogical sketchbook, and she worked through it. So she has a real debt to Clay in many ways, although her work doesn't look anything like his to a certain extent. But I went ahead and paired details of that big painting with some Paul Klee, and you can see the lines that he has coming across, and her, right, lines coming across. And you can see how she's using really dark outlines for some of her forms, and in his later work, he does the same. He uses these really dark, bold outlines. So she's looking at Clay, but she's not simply imitating him. She's actually creating her own idiom. She's just drawing on some of the lessons that he learned. Okay. Again, let's see. So we have 3 things that Paul Klee spirit might have given artists in India, right? The landscape, garden, animals, the color, and the line. Part of the line is also this idea of all-over drawing, that is, paintings with tons and tons of things or patterns or symbols on them. And this, I think, is something that Panikkar is also thinking about in his work. So here are 2 examples from Paul Klee. This is actually a garden. It's a nursery image where he's got all of the little plants lined up as they are in a nursery. But this all-over painting, every single piece of the canvas is covered with some sort of line. This is something that I think Panikkar is also picking up on in his work. And Panikkar is not alone here in the 1960s. So I think we also need to situate him not just in relation to Paul Klee, but in relation to other artists who are also thinking about writing in their work. So here I'm thinking about someone like Cy Twombly, who is an American artist working in Italy during the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he's on the right. And someone like Park Seo-bo, who's a Korean artist who has a whole series called Écriture, writing, where he has these massive canvases that he uses a pencil. He layers them in oil paint and then uses a pencil and does this kind of scribble gesture across. So these are the kinds of artists that are also thinking about this question of writing and what does it mean. So let me just take us to my final section so that I can hear your questions, because I want to hear your questions. Written pictures and free calligraphy. So in Panikkar's paintings, most of the script you see cannot be read, and he said very explicitly that he meant it to be illegible. So one of the reasons it's free is that it's free of linguistic meaning, right? It's not free of meaning. There's a sense in which we can understand it as writing, even if we don't read Malayalam, even if we don't know for sure it's not legible, right? And so he's bringing that in, that question of how do we know what we know? How can we read this? What does it mean to read something that's not actually a language? And in some ways, that's the very question of what does it mean to read a painting, right? What does it mean to read an abstract painting, especially? The other thing I want to point out is that this is very clearly an imitation or an illegible Malayalam. That is, it's not Tamil, it's not Kannada, it's not any other language of South Asia. It looks like the rounded script that is Malayalam, and in fact, in Malayalam, the word for the script means rounded, rounded script, I think is what it means. So here, just as a reminder, is what Malayalam looks like. These are 2 articles about Panikkar in Malayalam that are in his archive. So you get a sense of this rounded, I mean, look how gorgeous those curves are, right? And then when you go back to look at this painting, for example, you can really see that he's got all of these curves happening. This painting actually has some legible Malayalam in it. It's one of the few. So when he's using the text in his paintings, he's actually trying to make it feel like Malayalam, even if it is not legible. As opposed to some of the Western artists I just showed you who look like cursive. Their scribbles look like Roman script cursive. That's not what this looks like. So it's immediately identifiable as not some of these other languages. So it's free of meaning, but it's anchored in this particular culture, right? It functions as this kind of abstracted gesture, signaling writing without actually being able to be read. And one of the things that this makes me think about is the ways in which, in a place like South India, everybody you meet has a little bit of everything in terms of linguistic ability, right? So their mother tongue might be Malayalam, but they can get by in Kannada in a pinch. They might have some Hindi. Maybe they've been watching a lot of Hindi movies. Maybe they learned Hindi in school. They might have some English, right? And one of the refrains that I often hear when I'm traveling around South India is, someone who grew up in Tamil Nadu and has lived there their whole life, but their family is from Kerala, so they're Malayali, and they'll say, oh, but I don't really know Tamil. And I'll say, well, you were just talking with this person in Tamil, like fluently. How do you say that you don't know it? And it's this kind of interesting knowing, not knowing, right? It's like you know and you don't know at the same time. And I think that's really important to remember when we think about a sort of radically multilingual culture like South India, where how you communicate is also in this kind of web of understanding and misunderstanding at the same time, or understanding and partial understanding at the same time. Okay, sorry, I got off track here. Okay, so we were free of meaning. We're also in a post-colonial era, right? So we're free of colonialism. We have a new country, and we're free of some of the financial pressures because of the ways in which Panikkar has founded these groups and helped to support and fund the artists around him in Cholamandal. So all of these different aspects of free, I think, are at play here. And here's a reminder of the artist groups and the making of the batik. And we're also free in the 1960s and 70s to take from whatever art tradition we want to. Right? There's some pressure, I think, to be Indian, particularly in the years right after independence. And one of the things that these artists talk about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and today, when I talk to them, they still talk about this, is that suddenly we realized when we're in Paris, like, we can look at this art and use it. We can go to Italy and look at Renaissance painting and use it in our work. We can look at Japanese art and think about how it might help shape our work. The whole world is our oyster, right? And so there is a kind of freedom of, I can be Indian, but also looking globally. And that's something that Panikkar was very much invested in, as I started out by saying, and that you see in his publications and in all of his activities building community within the Chennai art world. So I hope that this also encourages you as art lovers, since you're here in the museum, I'm assuming, to open your eyes and minds to a wider slice of art from around the world and from communities not usually covered in our art history surveys, although that too is changing. You are free to explore, as I have explored, there's me, to make comparisons, to delve into these histories, to travel, to meet artists and fellow art lovers in countries around the world. It's one small way that we might try to bridge our differences and come together, as Panikkar tried to do in Cholamandal during a different time of different difficult politics, massive asymmetries of wealth and poverty, displacement and war. But art can challenge us to wrap our minds around things we don't understand, to extend empathy and care to someone else, and to expand ourselves in new directions. So I hope that what I've done here today has helped you along that path as well. Thank you so much.